The rumble of Harley Davidson engines echoed through the streets of Sydney. Men in leather jackets bearing the fierce image of Genghis Khan rode through the city with a confidence that made ordinary citizens step aside. They called themselves the Mongols Motorcycle Club, and they had just declared war on Australian law enforcement. What started as 3 small chapters on the New South Wales coast would explode into one of the most violent criminal organizations the country had ever seen. A brotherhood that would force police to abandon traditional methods and create the largest coordinated law enforcement response in Australian history. The man who brought this nightmare to Australia was Peter "Chop" Emerton. In 2013, he established the first Mongols chapters, importing a brand of organized crime that had terrorized American communities for decades. But Emerton had bigger plans than just running a motorcycle club. Within months, he orchestrated the largest criminal merger in Australian history. The Finks, one of the country's most powerful biker clubs, was facing a government ban. Emerton offered them a solution: join the Mongols and become part of something much bigger. Overnight, 90% of the Finks switched sides. The Mongols went from a small coastal operation to a criminal empire with 400 members spread across 5 states. They inherited established drug networks, weapons contacts, and territorial control that had taken decades to build. Australian law enforcement was about to face an enemy, unlike anything they had encountered before: the criminal takeover. The scale of what the Mongols achieved in Australia was staggering. Court documents and police intelligence reports reveal an organization that operated with corporate efficiency while maintaining the brutal violence of street criminals. Their primary business was methamphetamine trafficking, but this wasn't small-time dealing. Police investigations uncovered operations moving more than 50 pounds of nearly pure methamphetamine worth over $1 million. The Mongols had essentially industrialized drug trafficking. Money laundering operations cleaned millions of dollars through legitimate businesses. Extortion rackets targeted anyone who refused to pay protection money. Weapons trafficking brought military-grade firearms onto Australian streets. Violence was used as a business tool to maintain control and eliminate competition. The club's patch system told the story of their criminal hierarchy. Members wore specific patches that indicated their rank and specialization within the organization. Intelligence gathered by police revealed that certain patches allegedly indicated members who had killed for the club. Others marked those who had committed violence against rival clubs. The Mongols understood something that many other criminal organizations missed: the importance of appearing legitimate. They maintained legal businesses as fronts, participated in charity events, and presented themselves as motorcycle enthusiasts who simply enjoyed riding together. This carefully constructed image made law enforcement's job incredibly difficult. When police raided Mongols' properties, they weren't just fighting criminals. They were confronting an organization with lawyers, accountants, and a public relations strategy designed to portray any police action as harassment. The Mongols had also learned from other criminal organizations' mistakes. They used encrypted communications, kept their operations separate from each other, and maintained strict codes of silence. Members were taught to say nothing to police under any circumstances. By 2020, the Australian Federal Police had designated the Mongols as one of the Big 6 motorcycle clubs in the country. But unlike older, more traditional clubs, the Mongols brought a level of criminal sophistication that law enforcement had never encountered. They weren't just running criminal operations. They were running a criminal corporation with international connections and unlimited ambition. The violence begins. The first sign that Australia was dealing with something unprecedented came in the form of unprecedented violence. Shane Bowden's assassination on October 12, 2020, marked the beginning of a war that would terrorize entire communities. Bowden had been a member of the original Finks before joining the Mongols during the 2013 merger. But his story took a dark turn when he was expelled from the Mongols for attacking a fellow member. Desperate to rebuild his reputation, Bowden rejoined the reformed Finks and began recruiting new members. The Mongols viewed this as a direct threat to their dominance. In their twisted logic, his success in rebuilding the rival organization had made him a target. The assassination sparked a full-scale turf war between the Mongols and the Finks across southeast Queensland. What followed wasn't the occasional bar fight that police were used to dealing with. This was systematic, coordinated violence that put innocent civilians at risk. On June 5th, 2021, a barbershop in Windaroo was targeted in an arson attack. 2 days later, Mongols and Finks members engaged in a massive brawl at the Australia Fair shopping centre in Southport. Shoppers ran for cover as grown men fought with weapons in broad daylight. The most chilling discovery came when police arrested members from both clubs. They found documents showing that both organizations had issued attack-on-site orders. This meant that whenever a member of one club encountered a member of the rival organization, violence wasn't just permitted, it was required. Police realized they weren't dealing with occasional criminal disputes. They were dealing with urban warfare, with civilian areas as the battlefield. The violence wasn't limited to club rivalries. Court documents from prosecutions reveal a pattern of extreme brutality that shocked experienced law enforcement officers. Members were involved in kidnappings, torture, and murders that displayed a level of callousness that went beyond typical criminal activity. In one case, Mongols members kidnapped and tortured a former associate for hours before killing him. His crime was allegedly stealing motorcycles from another member and disrespecting the club's reputation. The message was clear. The Mongols didn't just punish disloyalty with expulsion, they punished it with death. The police fight back. When traditional policing methods failed to contain the Mongols' threat, Australian law enforcement did something unprecedented. They declared war back. The response began with specialized units designed specifically to combat outlaw motorcycle clubs. In New South Wales, the Raptor Squad was given powers that would have been unthinkable in previous decades. These weren't regular police officers. They were specially trained operators with access to intelligence resources normally reserved for counter-terrorism operations. The real game changer came with the establishment of National Task Force Morpheus. This wasn't just another police operation. It was a joint initiative that brought together every major law enforcement agency in Australia and New Zealand. For the first time in Australian law enforcement history, agencies that normally operated independently were sharing intelligence in real time, coordinating operations across state boundaries, and deploying resources on a scale normally reserved for national emergencies. The Australian Federal Police, all state and territory police forces, the Australian Border Force, Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, Australian Defence Force, Australian Taxation Office, and Services. Australia all contributed resources to the fight. The Mongols had brought military-style organization to crime. Law enforcement responded with military-style coordination. Task Force Morpheus's approach was comprehensive in a way that caught the Mongols completely off guard. Traditional police raids focused on seizing drugs and weapons. These new operations targeted every aspect of the club's operations simultaneously. While tactical teams were breaking down doors and executing search warrants, Australian Taxation Office investigators were examining financial records for tax evasion. Immigration officials were checking the visa status of international members. Services Australia was investigating welfare fraud. The Australian Border Force was monitoring international travel. The Mongols discovered that being a successful criminal organization had made them vulnerable in ways they had never considered. Their legitimate businesses became targets for regulatory investigations. Their financial success attracted the attention of proceeds of crime legislation. Perhaps most importantly, Task Force Morpheus represented a fundamental shift in how law enforcement approached organized crime. Instead of reacting to criminal activity after it occurred, they began targeting the infrastructure that made criminal organizations possible. The first major strike. The first major test of law enforcement's new approach came on December 3rd, 2020, with coordinated raids that would demonstrate the true scope of the war against the Mongols. In a single day, coordinated operations across multiple states resulted in 18 arrests, the seizure of almost 30 firearms, significant quantities of drugs, and substantial amounts of cash, all linked to the Mongols organization. Victoria Police Acting Assistant Commissioner Mick Fruin explained the significance. This is a group we know have traditionally been involved in violent crimes such as shootings, assaults, arson, drug trafficking, extortion, and intimidation. The raids involved nearly 20 search warrants executed simultaneously across the country. Intelligence gathered by the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission had allowed law enforcement to map the Mongols' organizational structure with unprecedented detail. They knew who the leaders were, where they lived, how they communicated, and what their roles were within the organization. The raids targeted not just random members, but specific individuals who held key positions in the club's hierarchy. AFP Acting Commander Sasha Rayner explained the new approach. The community need to be aware that OMCGs are not harmless motorcycle clubs. They are well-organized criminal organizations causing harm and disruption across our country. The intelligence gathered during the raids was immediately shared with all law enforcement agencies through coordination centers. Information seized in Sydney could be used to support investigations in Perth. Evidence gathered in Melbourne could lead to arrests in Brisbane. The Mongols were discovering that their traditional methods of keeping operations separate were useless against an enemy that shared information instantly across the entire country. The success of this operation led to an escalation in both the frequency and scope of anti-Mongols operations. What had started as occasional raids evolved into sustained campaigns designed to systematically dismantle the organization. Operation Victor Jenga. While massive national operations grabbed headlines, some of the most revealing battles were being fought on a smaller scale in the tropical city of Cairns, Queensland. Operation Victor Jenga began in August 2023, named after the wooden block game where removing the wrong piece causes the entire structure to collapse. Police were hoping to identify and remove the key pieces that held the Mongols' emerging Cairns operation together. The Cairns chapter represented something particularly concerning to law enforcement. Unlike the established chapters that had inherited their power from the Finks merger, this was a new operation being built from the ground up. Detective Senior Sergeant Brad Grace from the Far North Major and Organized Crime Squad explained, "Outlaw motorcycle clubs are not welcome in the Far North, and we will not tolerate any behavior that causes fear and harm in our community." The operation revealed the methodical way the Mongols approached expansion. Intelligence showed they were systematically recruiting local criminals, establishing drug distribution networks, and building the infrastructure necessary for large-scale criminal operations. The first major breakthrough came in October 2023, when raids across properties in Smithfield, Kiwara Beach, Moorabool, Red Lynch, Holloways Beach, and Edmonton resulted in 7 arrests and 17 charges, including assault, drug, and weapons offenses. Acting Detective Inspector Mark Andrews made the police position clear. If you are a member of, or if you associate with organized crime groups such as the Mongols, you will be targeted. By May 2024, another round of raids resulted in 6 more arrests and 23 additional charges, including grievous bodily harm and habitually consorting with recognized offenders. One of the most telling incidents came when police arrested a man at Cairns Airport after he had allegedly assaulted someone who interrupted a photo being taken. This wasn't random violence, it was enforcement of the club's code of respect and intimidation tactics. The electronic devices seized during the raids revealed images of Mongols Cairns City chapter members wearing branded clothing, essentially creating a digital record of their membership and activities. By November 2024, Operation Victor Jenga had resulted in numerous arrests and successfully disrupted the Mongols' expansion into far north Queensland. The Intelligence War. Behind every successful operation against the Mongols was an intelligence war that most Australians never knew was being fought. The Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission's coordination centers represented something unprecedented in law enforcement history. For the first time, intelligence about outlaw motorcycle clubs was being collected, analyzed, and shared on a national scale. The centers didn't just gather information about crimes that had already been committed. They built predictive models that could anticipate where conflicts would occur, identify emerging leaders, and track the flow of money, drugs, and weapons across state boundaries. The Mongols discovered that their traditional methods of staying hidden were useless against modern intelligence gathering. Encrypted communications could be monitored through metadata analysis. Financial transactions left digital footprints that could be traced across multiple jurisdictions. Perhaps most concerning for the Mongols was the development of human intelligence networks within their organization. The extreme violence and paranoia that characterized the club culture had created numerous members who were willing to cooperate with law enforcement. The intelligence picture that emerged was staggering in its detail. Law enforcement agencies developed organizational charts that showed not just who the leaders were, but how decisions were made, how money flowed through the organization, and how conflicts were resolved. This intelligence advantage manifested in operations that seemed almost supernatural in their precision. Police would arrive at locations just as criminal activities were taking place, arrest specific individuals who held key positions, and seize evidence that perfectly matched their intelligence assessments. The Mongols began to suspect that their communications were being monitored, their movements tracked, and their plans anticipated. The paranoia this created had a devastating effect on organizational cohesion. Members began to suspect each other of being informants. The club's international structure, which had been one of their greatest strengths, became a vulnerability when law enforcement agencies began sharing intelligence across national boundaries. Information gathered by Australian agencies was shared with American law enforcement, and vice versa. Members who thought they could escape Australian law enforcement by traveling overseas discovered that their names were already known to police in their destination countries. The Escalation. By 2024, the war between the Mongols and Australian law enforcement had escalated to unprecedented levels. During 1 week of coordinated action, police across the country arrested 159 people, laid 693 charges, and seized 43 firearms and $1 million in cash. The operation involved almost 2,100 police officers, more personnel than many countries deploy for national security operations. The scale of these operations had become routine. What would have been front-page news in previous decades was now simply another day in Australia's ongoing war against outlaw motorcycle clubs. The sustained pressure had forced the Mongols to fundamentally change how they operated. The large-scale, high-profile criminal activities that once characterized the club were replaced by smaller, more cautious operations that generated less revenue but also attracted less law enforcement attention. The organization was forced to decentralize their operations in ways that made coordination more difficult, but also made complete destruction nearly impossible. Instead of centralized criminal enterprises, they now operated more like a network of semi-independent criminal cells. Financial investigations proved particularly effective. By targeting the proceeds of crime and pursuing civil forfeiture actions, law enforcement made it financially disadvantageous to be involved with the organization. Members found that the costs of legal defense, lost assets, and reduced criminal income often exceeded any benefits of membership. The recruitment pipeline that once supplied the organization with new members had been severely disrupted. The constant law enforcement attention made the club far less attractive to potential recruits who could see the fate of current members. Regular raids, constant surveillance, and aggressive prosecution of even minor offenses made being a Mongols member a full-time liability. The current battlefield. The most recent operations demonstrate both the progress law enforcement has made and the challenges that remain. In August 2024, another national week of action resulted in arrests across multiple states. The Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission reported that, with their propensity for violence and established criminal networks, outlaw motorcycle clubs remain ranked as the largest serious and organized crime threat impacting Australia. ACIC Acting Executive Director Wendy Darling stated, "The ACIC works diligently with its partners, both domestically and offshore, in a collaborative manner to make Australia hostile to criminal exploitation. The operations now target every aspect of the club's infrastructure simultaneously. While tactical teams execute search warrants, other agencies investigate tax evasion, welfare fraud, immigration violations, and money laundering." Detective Chief Inspector David Huddy from South Australia, police described the current approach. Numerous arrests were made for acts of violence and drug trafficking. Seizures included a loaded handgun, trafficable amounts of methamphetamine and cocaine, and over $100,000 in cash. The operations have become so sophisticated that they now involve monitoring prison communications, conducting cell searches on incarcerated members, and tracking financial transactions across multiple jurisdictions. The Mongols have responded by becoming even more secretive and paranoid. Communications are now heavily encrypted, meetings are held in remote locations, and new members undergo extensive background checks to identify potential police informants. The club has also tried to improve their public image by participating in charity events and maintaining legitimate businesses. However, law enforcement agencies have become equally sophisticated in their counterintelligence operations. The ongoing war. The war between the Mongols and Australian law enforcement represents more than just a conflict between criminals and police. It's a preview of how modern organized crime will be fought in the 21st century. The Mongols brought to Australia a model of criminal organization that combined traditional motorcycle club structure with sophisticated criminal methodologies. Law enforcement responded by developing new forms of coordination and intelligence sharing that have fundamentally changed how organized crime is investigated and prosecuted. The lessons learned from the Mongols conflict are already being applied to other criminal organizations. The intelligence coordination systems developed for Task Force Morpheus are now being used to target other forms of organized crime. However, the Mongol story also demonstrates the limitations of law enforcement approaches to organized crime. Despite years of intensive operations and hundreds of arrests, the organization continues to exist. Members continue to be arrested, convicted, and replaced. The communities that have suffered the most from Mongols' violence are often the same communities that struggle with unemployment, social disadvantage, and limited opportunities for legitimate advancement. Until these underlying issues are addressed, criminal organizations will continue to find recruits. The war against the Mongols has shown that modern law enforcement has unprecedented capabilities to monitor, disrupt, and prosecute criminal organizations. But it has also shown that criminal organizations have remarkable adaptability and resilience. The future of this conflict will likely be determined not by who can deploy more resources, but by which side can best adapt to the changing nature of crime and law enforcement in the digital age. The story of the Mongols versus Australian law enforcement continues to unfold. Every day brings new arrests, new operations, and new tactics from both sides. The Mongols are no longer the unstoppable criminal empire they once appeared to be. Australian law enforcement is no longer the fragmented collection of agencies it once was. The war has created a new reality where criminal organizations must assume they are under constant surveillance, and law enforcement agencies must assume that criminals have access to sophisticated counter-surveillance techniques. The conflict has redefined both organized crime and the fight against it. The Mongols brought a new kind of criminal organization to Australia. Law enforcement responded with a new kind of coordinated response. The war continues, evolving with new technologies, new tactics, and new players on both sides. The only certainty is that this battle for control of Australia's streets is far from over. The question that remains is not whether the war will end, but how it will evolve as both sides adapt to an ever-changing battlefield.